Hey guys, time to talk about evolution. So this is a topic we don't spend a lot of time covering in our biology classes in ninth grade, although you may have covered it more if you took AP biology. So we're going to talk about it here in environmental science. So there's a lot of myths about evolution. So we're going to address some of those myths and we're going to talk about what it really means. So first, this idea of natural selection. So that's really the main concept behind evolution, although there is also artificial selection as well. So natural selection is the theory that was developed by Charles Darwin and first presented in his book called The Origin of Species, published in 1859. So Darwin's thoughts presented in The Origin of Species are based on his observations in the Galapagos Islands, and it's the first formal presentation, by Darwin at least, of this idea that species evolve. So let's talk about this theory behind natural selection. So first, we need to understand that all organisms are engaged in an existential struggle for existence. We happen to think about our struggle for existence. Most animals don't. They're just trying to stay alive. In order to stay alive as a prey animal, you have to escape from predators. And as a predator animal, you need to be faster than the prey. There is, as you guys know, physical and behavioral variation in living organisms, even at the species level. Humans obviously are a fantastic example of the enormously wide range of physical and behavioral variations, but dogs are also a great example. Now, they've been bred through artificial selection to have these different characteristics, but we have to, in order to have natural selection, have lots of variation within a species. So now we get into what you guys think of typically when you think of evolution, and that is the theory of survival of the fittest. And that comes from the idea that organisms with more helpful adaptations are more likely to survive. So we call that higher fitness. This does not mean stronger. This simply means that their adaptations are better for their given environment. So over time, natural selection is going to ensure that certain characteristics are going to appear more and more as they get passed through the generations. And so over time, entire species can change, they can evolve, we can develop new species. The central concept behind evolution is that all living species are descended from other species over time. So this is the theory of common descent or descent with modification. Obviously, this means that we're all on the same tree. However, there is a lot of variation, a lot of branching along that tree. And you see that sometimes some of those organisms rejoin the tree and actually become part of other organisms. So when we summarize natural selection, it's important to recognize that survival of the fittest does not mean that we're artificially selecting for or that we're selecting the strongest. It simply means that sometimes there are mutations in genes, and those mutations in genes make individuals better adapted to survive and reproduce. And those individuals that survive and reproduce produce populations that look like them. And so those populations over time have evolved. So when we put all of this together, what we mean is that genes mutate, individuals survive and reproduce, and populations evolve. It's really important to distinguish that populations can evolve. Individual organisms cannot evolve. Individual organisms can adapt, they can survive and reproduce, but generally speaking, individual organisms also, we don't use the term mutate, we talk about the genes mutate, and that causes changes in individuals. So what are some of those adaptations that have made us so very, very successful? One is that we walk upright. We have longer arms, we can see farther. So it allows us to be more ready for protecting ourselves. We have opposable thumbs, which allow us to grasp objects. And the biggest difference between us and our closest relatives is the size of our brains. So these three adaptations are what have made humans so very successful. So if we've evolved to be successful in our current environment, why can't we just evolve to cope with our new environmental conditions? Why do we have to worry about global climate change? Why can't we just let it go? We've evolved this far, we can just keep evolving. Evolution depends on the genes for new traits already being present in a population. This is the same reason that you can't ask polar bears to simply evolve, because polar bears don't have the genes to exist in a different way. And then the other major slowdown for humans in evolution is our generation times. It's a long time between generations in humans. So we can't evolve very quickly. Fruit flies have lifespans in weeks. Their populations can show change and evolution very quickly. Human evolution takes thousands of years. So some myths about evolution. Please, please, please recognize that what you are writing down are things that are not true. The biggest myth about evolution is that fitness means strongest, fastest, or biggest. If that were the case, there would be no turtles. Okay, there would be no mice. So fitness simply means the ability to survive. And that fitness, what makes an organism fit for survival, depends very much on the environment in which that organism lives. Another myth about evolution is that organisms develop new traits in order to help them in their environment. That's simply not true. That trait has to already be there, and then they select for the ones that have that trait are more likely to survive. The ones that survive reproduce. And then another myth about evolution is that it is a constant progression towards some perfect ideal. Evolution is not a progression towards an ideal. It is chance. It is happenstance. It happens. It's what happens because those organisms survive and reproduce. So there are a bunch of geological processes that affect evolution. The locations of continents is a big one. So as continents move around, it changes the climate, it changes the habitat, and so that affects what traits are desirable, and it affects what organisms survive. Of course, that movement of continents also allows animals to move from one continent to another before they split. And then once they split, it leads to something called speciation, which is where you might have two organisms that start out very, very similar, and yet in one continent, the traits that are advantageous are different from those on another continent. And so those are the organisms that survive. And then, of course, extinction. So as continents have shifted and changed, Antarctica used to be a warm continent. It is no longer. So certainly organisms that are in an environment for which they are no longer adapted are going to go extinct. Very often earthquakes isolate populations. So we get those geographical islands. And so that can lead to speciation again once they are separated. Anything that destroys habitat, so particularly volcanoes, they can cause extinction, they can cause adaptations. And then asteroid impacts cause widespread extinctions, as in the case of the dinosaurs, and that is largely due to the climate change that they produce. And of course, climate change vastly affects evolution, whether that's ice ages that create land bridges and make animals that are better adapted for cold weather more likely to survive, or whether that's warming periods. And so both ice ages and warming periods cause migrations, they cause extinctions, and they create new niches. All right, that's the end of our conversation about evolution. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you soon.